Their shirts be very strange, not reaching past the thigh, with pleats on pleats thy pleated are as thick as pleats may lie, whose sleeves hang trailing down almost unto the shoe, and with a mantle commonly the Irish kern do go. John Derrick's Image of Ireland, 1581. What is the crack, guys? It is Nathan here, aka the Rambling Kern and head instructor of Kern School of Combat. So, as you guessed from that little brief intro, and obviously from what I'm wearing, this video is all about the Leine. So, what is the Leine? Leine is basically just the Irish word for shirt. Now, this is the most iconic piece of traditional Irish clothing. Now, in my previous video, many of the things that we think are traditional Irish clothing are not. We think about flat caps, tweed jackets, and this kind of stereotypical vision of what traditional Irish dress is. Most of those are modern inventions or British imports, or in some cases even like colonial enforcement. This is the iconic piece of Irish clothing. What was called the Saffron shirt, or simply the Irish Leine. Now, this item of clothing has a really fascinating and interesting history, and obviously it's a fascinating looking piece of clothing. So the most obvious things to address first is obviously the colour. So often these were dyed with saffron. Now, anyone who knows what saffron is, it's a herb, or beg your pardon, it's a spice often used in cooking. However, it's also known to be basically worth its weight in gold. By that I mean it takes a huge amount of saffron flowers to grow the necessary spice to then use for saffron. I forget the exact figures, but it's something like 10,000 flowers per gram or ounce. I forget which, but either way, it is a huge amount needed for it. Now, this is not dyed with saffron. Saffron would actually lend a more vibrant, brighter yellow colour. This is dyed using modern dyes in a close approximation. It's a little bit darker, but also, interestingly, as you would have guessed from the price of saffron, and obviously me saying that it is one of the most expensive dyes at the time, second only to purple. And purple was known as the king's colour. So even to this day, a lot of royalty and regal colours, like my man Prince, were known for wearing purple. Saffron was next on that list, and obviously for myself, when I'm portraying any sort of person or culture, I don't really like to focus on the nobility and the rich, because to me that's not really very interesting. To me, I'm more interested in what the day-to-day man was like, and that's where this shirt really fascinates me, because simply put, this was a really expensive bit of kit. Now, obviously, you have these massive sleeves, wizard sleeves, that some might refer to them as. But the interesting thing about this is, as you can see, it's only a small opening. All the rest of this is just additional fabric, purely for aesthetic reasons. Now, you won't see, but you'll see in some other pictures, but this goes all the way down to the feet when unbelted, as I have here. I have it belted off and folded up to sit around the waist. So for me, it sits basically just about mid-thigh, and as you can't see, I'm also wearing no trousers, as was common, and as you'll see in some of the upcoming pictures. So there's a few really interesting things to note. Like I said, this was very expensive. Converted into today's money, the average cost of one of these was about $2,800, which, to put that into perspective, I mean that's a average second-hand car. Huge amount of money. Or in clothing context, I guess that would be a very high-end tailored suit. So these were hugely popular, and to the point where Irish people were getting one of these a year and basically like wearing it until it wore into rags. This was the go-to fashion, and this is something that I find is a huge misconception within modern interpretations of medieval and Renaissance periods. Fashion was huge. It was as important to many people as it was or is for many people today. Often you see these depictions of people wearing animal skins and like burlap sort of materials. If someone walked into a medieval village wearing that, everyone would kind of be looking at them in the same way if someone walked into a town today wearing it. It's just not the done thing, and it would just be very, very weird, very, very out of place. So, interesting little details about this. Obviously, huge amount of cloth involved, a huge amount of cloth used, and obviously, like I mentioned, the dye. That's why it was so expensive. The more cloth you use, the more expensive it gets. And this, one of the main reasons why saffron was used is because Irish linen, even to today, is a hugely popular and very prized cloth. The problem with linen, though, is that it doesn't take the dye very well. So, obviously today we have modern dyes like this, which work perfectly, but you would need specific sorts of dyes that would actually dye and, more importantly, keep the colour. And that's where saffron came in. So, saffron was the preferred dye, often mixed or used as part of an overall process. And for anyone who doesn't know what saffron is, I'll show a picture of it now. So, often it was mixed in with other dyes to create the recognized saffron colour, but more importantly, it was hugely prized, to the point where people, even soldiers, as part of their pay, were taking on dyed saffron cloth. To put it in perspective, I converted some of the costs, and thanks once again to the crowd over at Wilde Irish. I'll put a link to their blog on the saffron shirt. Really fascinating, really good in-depth read. And also goes into some of the other countries, such as Greece, that had a very popular saffron shirt and quite similar styles seen across Europe. But the pay was almost $1,800 in modern money. Would have been the pay given just for these, for soldiers who were enlisting. And that's a huge amount of money for fashion. So these were very much the prized possessions of so many Irish people. But the interesting part of this as well is that you might think it's not the most practical, but it always seems to be worn by warriors. And obviously at later periods where English fashion, for one reason or another, was becoming more popular and more influential in Ireland, let's say, there was still many Irish people choosing to wear these. As I talked about in my video on what is traditional Irish clothing, there were many attempts to ban these and outlaw these. Not just the actual Leine itself, but also the hairstyles of the time and various other fashions and means of culture, so to speak. So two things that were banned from this was the actual use of saffron dye itself, but also the use of cloth. So at the beginning there was an attempt to just straight up outlaw them, and then later it became you can only use certain amounts of cloth per your social standing. So a chieftain could wear a certain amount and a labourer could wear much less. And to put it into perspective, these were huge amounts of cloth, even by modern standards. I mean, obviously, a modern t-shirt, you could probably make 5 of them out of this. So it was very much a showy item, to the point where people were even carrying out cattle raids and stealing from other neighbouring clans in order to get the money to buy these. So these would have often been given or bought for feast days, so the likes of Christmas or Easter, and then worn throughout the year, like I mentioned, until they were basically rags and you had the money and funds to buy another one. So, as I mentioned, some of the interesting things with this. Now, there's 2 types of clothing that resemble this in earlier medieval history. So that's the hoepenlaad and the bliat. Apologies if I'm mastering those pronunciations. I'm not too sure. I believe both are French, but not 100% sure on that. But basically they're kind of defined by these large sleeves. And you probably would have seen in kind of fantasy or medieval films, more often than not, ladies' fashion. And actually so shows some Irish ladies and how they wore their sleeves. Worn in a very similar way to the men, where the sleeve was actually exposed through slits in the sleeves of the jacket that they were wearing as well. So obviously there's those two items, but this differs quite a bit. And the very interesting thing about this is, while those were popular, what I think basically happened, and this happens in a lot of kind of outer cultures in the world, is that this was seen most likely during the 100 Years' War, with troops going back and forth from Ireland into France under the service of the English. Now, purely conjecture on my part, but just a hypothesis. But either way, there was plenty of trade back and forth, and fashion, as it does today, migrates around the world. So it was most likely that Irish people saw that fashion and thought, wow, that looks incredible, but doesn't really suit what we're about, let's change it up. And that's basically what has been done with this. And I'd also like to thank Spes Medieval Market, SPES, who made this for me. I very much am not a tailor and lacked the ability to make this. So I really do appreciate the work that they did, and I will put a link in the description to their website. I'm in no way sponsored by them, I'm in no way backed by them, but they do great work, so I really recommend you go check it out if you need any sort of medieval clothing. Or if you're interested in getting one of these commissioned, let them know I sent you. They may even dye it with saffron if you ask really nicely. So this is the first of a series that I'm going to be doing on the clothing worn by the Kern. And probably more interesting for most people is that I'm going to be bringing this out across various parts of Ireland and seeing what it's like to actually wear and use in the field. So if you're interested in that, do stay tuned. We'll be doing more videos on different items and different, not just clothing, but obviously you've seen from the previous videos, on weaponry and on the actual equipment I'll be using as well. So if you're interested, give us a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. We got to feed the algorithm gods, and it really does help. And if you're interested in classes, my details are below. And if you just like the video, or you're interested in this part of history and want to know more, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to talk to you and discuss. So once again, huge thank you to the team of Wilde Irish, WILDE. A link will be in the description for them, and I do hope you enjoyed. And once again, thank you very much, and Slán.